Okay, so now we're going to look at the directing a project process, which is located here. Okay, so it's all by the project board, and we're going to, as usual, identify who's responsible, state the purpose and objectives, and then describe the activities in the directing a project process. So according to our methodology, the board's responsible for making all decisions in the project. So depending on the size and complexity of the project, the board can control the project formally via written reports and assigned stage approval, or informally through verbal communication. So as we commented on in one of the examples that one of you brought up, that if we have a project that we find out partway through the initiation or startup stage is not viable, we may verbally express that to our executive, and that would be a type of exception report, and discuss it with them and determine what we need to do next. So the board can determine the level of formality. So there's still, even though you need to do all of these things, i.e. apply all the principles and all the themes, there's a fair bit of flexibility for you to tailor our 7th principle, to tailor the approach so that it is reasonable given the particular project and context that you're working in. Okay, so the purpose is to enable the project board to be accountable by making sure that they're involved in the key decisions and exercising overall control without actually getting involved in the day-to-day management of the project, because that's what the project manager is there for. So it's all about making appropriate use of their time by involving them when and where required and not bothering them when it's not. So we do this through setting up our tolerances and defining our stages. If we don't need the project manager to update us throughout the project, it can be one long stage in terms of the management process. If we do want them to give us, allow us to provide input, then we'll make it smaller stages, or maybe multiple stages of a longer length if we want a mid-range of control. So the objective is to make sure that there's authority to initiate the project and deliver project products. Okay, so when we received the mandate, we had authority from the corporate or program level to start the project startup process. And the directing a project process makes sure that when we initiate, we have approval to do that, and that we have approval for any subsequent stages to deliver the products. So the board isn't actually approving the work packages that authorize the individual team leaders to work on the product delivery, but it does authorize the stages so that the project manager can go ahead and authorize work packages. It gives management direction and control throughout the project life, and it makes sure that the project remains viable throughout the project life. And that's because it's the project board's responsibility to make sure that the business case is valid, and also to make sure that project assurance is happening, to make sure the project is being managed according to the plans and strategies and business case that have been laid out. The corporate or program management interfaces with directing a project process. So that's where the corporate or program level gets their interface. You'll notice on the diagrams, any of the diagrams we see, you don't see a direct link from team leads to the corporate or program level or to the board level. There's that hierarchy is always followed. The corporate or program management, sorry, I just did that one. The benefits review plan is managed and reviewed. So they're responsible for the benefits review plan and making sure that the benefits are realized for the organization. So if we look at our image of the directing a project process, as we saw on our starting up, they will authorize project initiation based on our project brief and our request to initiate the project, as we see here, which came out of the starting up. So once they authorize initiation, the project manager has authorization to initiate the project, then we'll execute the initiating process. At the end of it, we'll make a request to deliver the project. The project board, under directing a project, will authorize the project and notify the program level that they've authorized the project. Then they'll also authorize the stage or exception plan, depending on which has been submitted for approval. which allows the project manager to begin the work on a particular stage and assign the work packages within that stage. So most of their work is at the stage boundaries. However, an exception report can be raised at any time, and a request for advice, as we see here, can be raised at any time as well, or advice on an issue that needs to be escalated up can happen at any time as well. So the board gives ad hoc direction. That's part of the directing a project process. And then finally, in the last stage, they're going to authorize project closure, and that comes from the closing a project process. Or there may be premature close. An exception may cause us to go back and look at the business case and realize that it's no longer a viable project and it may be closed early. So they would also give that approval. The board similarly, in directing a project, can request advice from the program or corporate level, and they can give advice back. When the project is closed, the board is notified, or sorry, the program level is notified, the program board. So the activities related to directing a project are to authorize initiation, authorize the project, authorize a stage or exception plan, and to give ad hoc direction, and then authorize project closure. So during the Authorise Initiation, the project board is going to review and approve the project brief, which, as we recall, includes the project, the business case, and the project product description. They're confirming the customer's quality expectations and acceptance criteria. So we would have had to prepare the project product description, which includes your quality expectations. Did you review with, in the last couple sessions, the makeup of the project product description? Because if you didn't, I'm going to go through it now. I'm assuming you did. I usually do when I'm doing the principles and that, but when we do the manage by product principle. So I'm going to assume you did, but if you did not, let me know and we will go through it in detail because it's an important one to know. So because our quality expectations our quality expectations and acceptance criteria are always defined in our product description. So the project product description needs to identify those as well. All right, I'm going to go through it just to be sure, because if a couple of you don't remember, it is an important one to go through. Just let me flip to it here, make sure I don't leave anything out. Okay, so the project product description is used to understand the detailed nature and purpose or function of the appearance of the product. So am I doing an accounting system? Am I offering an educational program in a country? Am I trying to encourage economic development through offering loans? So it describes the product. It's going to define who's going to use it. So I'm going to get some identification of the stakeholders involved when I look at who's using it. Identify any sources of information that might supply the product. So am I going to have to use contractors, for example? Is it something I'm buying off the shelf? Is it information I'm getting from a government department about a program that they will fund if I'm looking at them as a source of funding, perhaps? I can identify the level of detail required for the product in terms of its quality. So I'm looking at both quality and grade there. Meaning, is it a high-end product or a low functionality, minimal product, and the grade or the quality being it's fit for purpose. So it could be a low-grade, high-quality product, but I'm defining all of that in my product description. So if I'm offering, for example, I run an e-commerce website, and my hosting provider offers a number of different grades of service. One being the bare minimum, I can host my site and everything's up to me to look after. Or the one I have, because I'm too busy, is the top grade service where they do all my backups, they monitor to make sure the site stays up, and they monitor the performance and all those kinds of things. So that would be the grade. And the quality, just making sure it fits in the appropriate grade. They verify that the outline business case demonstrates a viable project. So the board is the one that's ultimately responsible for the success of the project. So because the board is ultimately responsible, they've got to make sure that that outline business case demonstrates that it's viable. So that's the the product description has to be detailed enough that it can help determine that from the business case. So it's got to also identify the activities to produce, review, and approve the product. Define the people or skills required to produce and review and approve the product. So if I need specialist skills, for example, I would need to define that in the product description. So if I'm producing a car and I'm producing engine components, some of those engine components, the pistons and that, might have to be within a couple thousandths of an inch of tolerance to the specification to be acceptable. Whereas if I'm producing the tire, a quarter of an inch may be close enough. So there's a big difference in those tolerance levels and also the types of equipment and expertise that would be required to produce a product with finer tolerances. So all of those things are defined in your product description. So your product description will have a unique identifier so that you can uniquely track that product in the configuration items in your configuration management system. You're going to have a brief title, sort of the text by which you're going to refer to the product. You're going to define its purpose. So its purpose is to, if it's an accounting system, your purpose is to keep track of financial records and do financial reporting. If it's a project in a developing country, it might be to stimulate economic growth in a region, or to improve the health of citizens in a region. So that would be looking at its purpose. Its composition. So for example, when we looked at perhaps reducing the incidence of a specific disease in an area, we could do it through education. We could do it through providing medications. We could do it through improving health. So what components of that are making up the product of reducing and improving the health of people? Big difference in the scope, right, as to whether I'm just educating the healthcare workers or I'm educating the general population and providing goods that will help them, like mosquito nets, inoculations, better quality food, perhaps drinking water. Very different cost and scope to the project. So that's why we have to list the composition. We'd also want to identify where we're getting the products, the parts from. So do I have a particular supplier in mind? Am I going to make the parts myself? I've also got to list the format and presentation. So is it a report? Is it an online tool that I'm looking at? Composition does not equal approaches. Composition is the parts that it's made up of. It's affected by the approaches. So if my approach is to do public education and inoculations, for example, I'm going to have vaccines as one of my compositions. So in that particular example that I used, they do sound like they're equal. But approach could be to outsource versus developing in-house. And my composition could be a financial reporting, an ad hoc financial reporting tool that interfaces with my current accounting package, and then also having an accounts payable, accounts receivable, and an outsourced component that fits in there as well. Development skills required, we covered off. The quality criteria, the quality tolerances. So if I have to have, if my specifications indicate that a piston on a car needs to be a certain size, what's my tolerance range on that? Is it plus or minus 1/1000th, 2/1000ths of an inch, 1/8 of an inch? So that would be an example of a quality tolerance. How I'm going to measure that tolerance. So what's my quality method? Am I using automated testing tools? If I'm producing a vaccine and I need to test its quality, I probably need some very specialized tools to do that. So what's my quality method and what skills are required, and then the responsibilities. And so that's an overview of the product description. Okay, so once we've produced the product description, we confirm the quality expectations and the acceptance criteria. So my senior customer is going to be taking a very close look at this and maybe asking some of their stakeholders and staff to look into this as well. They'll verify the outline business case, as we said, review and approve the stage plan for the initiation stage. They're going to obtain or commit resources needed for the initiation stage plan. So if they're supposed to hire people, they would commit the funds in order to do that and give the approvals to go ahead and issue contracts, etc. Or they might be reallocating staff to work on the project. They inform all the stakeholders and the host locations that the project is being initiated. So for example, a host location, if I'm a multinational company and the project is going to affect certain offices in in specific countries, I would be notifying the people that are impacted, is what we're saying here, and making sure that all of the stakeholders at those locations are also communicated with. They authorize the project manager to proceed with the initiation stage. So those are all of the activities related to authorizing initiation. So as you can see, it looks like one bullet when we look at the summary, but there's quite a bit involved when they do this. So let's look at a summary of this on a diagram. So we're going to get the project request to initiate the project, which includes the project brief and the initiation stage plan. Then they authorize the project by carrying out all the activities we just looked at, which ends up with an approved project brief and an approved stage plan for the initiation stage. Those then become baselined products. They get the authority to initiate the project, and they give the notification to the program or corporate level that the project's being initiated. Okay, so that's what they do at the end of the startup process and prior to the initiating process. So when we look at the next task, which is the authorizing the project, it's very similar to what they did in the startup, except now they have a lot more details and a lot more deliverables to review. So the project manager is going to make the request to deliver the project. The board's going to confirm that there's an adequate and suitable business case. Now we have the full business case, not just the outline business case, and that the project's viable. They're going to make sure that the project is, if it's prematurely closed, they're going to make sure that the authorization to prematurely close is issued if they don't approve it. When they're authorizing the project, they're going to confirm the quality, risk, communication, and configuration management strategies are sufficient. So when they're doing this, they're looking at if there are program or corporate level standards or requirements related to those strategies, that those have been adhered to. They may have project assurance looking at these documents, which may be a member of the board or someone external to the board that will be looking at these to help give them guidance on that as well. So they make sure that those. They also make sure that if any customization to these strategies from the corporate standards is required, that it's justified and has been reflected in these plans. So if there's anything unique about the program that requires something special to be done, they make sure that that's addressed. They then review and approve the benefits review plan, because as we're going to see when we look at the initiating process, we're going to have created the benefits review plan there. So it will get approved when we authorize the project. Okay, so to summarize that, we're going to have the request to deliver a project. We're going to see a lessons log. Okay, so the project initiation documentation is used to define the project so that it has the basis for management and assessment of the overall success. So what's going to be included in there is going to be the detailed scope. It's going to have all the stages identified and the deliverables required at the end of each stage, or the progress that was to be achieved at each of those stages. So that's going to all be outlined there. It basically forms a contract between the project board and the project manager. So the project, they're both agreeing that the way we're going to manage the project is described in the project initiation documentation, and we all believe that we can achieve the results that we intended to with it, and we will be successful. So there's three primary uses. We use it to ensure there's a sound basis before we go to the board for a commitment to the project. It acts as the base document against which we can assess our project and viability of the project. So we are assessing progress and viability. It provides a single source of reference about the project so that anybody new joining the project can quickly and easily find out what the project's about and how it's being managed. And we maintain this documentation throughout the project. So when we do exception reports, when we're doing our progress review, if necessary, i.e. if there are changes to what we're doing, we reflect that back into the project initiation documentation, and it's rebaselined. So it's composed of a background. It has the project's objectives and desired outcomes. It includes constraints and assumptions, and the project approach, the business case. So again, the project initiation documentation isn't one document, typically. It could be, but it typically isn't. It's an amalgamation of different documents. So it would include the business case, the business management team structure and the role descriptions. The quality management strategy is part of that. The configuration management strategy is part of the initiation documentation, as well as the risk management strategy, the communication strategy. The overall project plan is included in the project initiation documentation, which is also called the PID, by the way, the PID, the PID. Any project controls, so all of the tolerances, all of the guidance around when the project manager should escalate to the board is documented there. And a summary of how the PRINCE2 has been tailored for the project could also be included. So it also has the project quality criteria, which is going to come from, a lot of that will come from the project product description, which is also included as part of the project initiation documentation. So in summary, at a high level, that's what it is. You'll find it on page 254 of Managing Successful Projects. So the PID is basically everything about how you're going to manage the project and its scope and how the stages are set up and the tolerances and all of that. And in addition, we would have the benefits review plan. So those three products go into the Authorize. The steps we just went through on the last screen are carried out by the board, and then we approve the project initiation documentation and the benefits review plan, and they are then baselined. So this means that because my business case is part of this, my full business case now replaces the outline business case from startup. We give the project authorization notification to the program and corporate level, and if appropriate, i.e. if in initiation we determine the project was not desirable or feasible, we will go to premature close. Any questions? And the same steps would occur if it's an exception plan that we're reviewing, because it would replace an exception. This is basically the same for any time we review a plan, which brings us to our next step. So the next task that they have is to authorize a stage or exception plan. So anytime a tolerance is exceeded or planned to be exceeded, we raise an exception, and if requested to, we produce the exception plan, and then it's submitted to the board, and they will either approve it or request changes or what have you. Any deviations from the overall project plan, so the high-level plan outlining the stages and the dates the stages will finish and the products that are being produced, etc., would need to be escalated up to the corporate and program level. Any deviations in the work packages go to the project manager using the controlling stage, and only if the deviations in the work package, once they're consolidated across all the work packages in the stage, if they exceed the stage tolerance, then the project manager would have to escalate that up to the project board. But they don't escalate every single work package, only if either the consolidation of the impacts of those work package deviations, or if the single work package's deviation exceeds the stage exceptions tolerances in any of the 6 areas. And the 6 areas that we establish tolerances on, of course, are the risk, quality, benefits, scope, cost, and time. If an exception plan is requested, it's approved by the board, and it replaces the plan that it was related to. So if the exception was only at the stage level, it will replace the stage level plan. If the the exception affected both the stage and the project plan, both would be replaced. And then they become the new baseline plan. So if we look at the summary for authorizing a stage or an exception plan, our inputs have changed, right, from the authorizing the project, but they're similar. I'm still looking at I'm still looking at lessons learned or follow-on action recommendations from lessons learned, but I'm looking at them in the context of an end stage report now. So in addition to the lessons learned from other projects I would have looked at in the approving a project, I now look at them from what did I actually experience on my project in the last stage. I'm going to have the stage plan for the next stage. So instead of the initiation stage plan or the project plan, I have the initiation stage or an exception plan. my benefits review plan, and my updated project initiation documentation. So the only difference between this and approving the project or authorizing the project was the number of inputs and the scope of the inputs. I'm still going to do all the same things. I will have an updated and approved project initiation documentation. So for example, if doing the work, I realized that the benefits were going to be more or less than I anticipated, I would update the business case to reflect that. My end stage report would be approved and stored. My next stage plan is approved and baselined, and my benefits review plan would have been updated and approved if it needed to be. As you see, my end stage produces my lessons report and my follow-on actions if required. So at this point, I'm either going to get from my project board an authorization to proceed with the stage, a premature close, or the exception plan being authorized. So the other task that the board will perform in directing a project process is to provide ad hoc report direction. So they'll do this for an escalated issue or when they simply need advice from management, or they want to take a decision. So if there's a problem or concern, the project manager will prepare an exception plan, or they may ask for guidance, in which case the board would give it. If there's a request for change, the project board would either approve, defer, or reject that change, or ask for more information. Keeping in mind that by default the project board is the change authority. However, some changes may be delegated down to the project level with very clear criteria around what those are, or that may be delegated to a change manager. But by default, they would be providing, approving and providing advice on them. They would also, in the case of an off specification, grant a concession, defer a decision till a later time, reject or ask for more information, and determine if an exception report is required based on the off specification. So if the off specification means we won't achieve certain benefits, they have to see if that's going to exceed the project tolerances and escalate to the program level for approval if they need to give a concession and get that approved in that area. Okay, so this is the examples of the types of things they might give ad hoc direction on. So again, to summarize, the project manager can request advice. They may get an exception that's been raised, or they might ask corporate for advice and decisions, or corporate may ask them for advice or decisions. They're going to receive highlight reports, exception reports, and issue reports in terms of the types of documents that they will get, unless they've determined they want them in verbal form. So their outputs of this task are going to be that they provided advice as requested, they provided the exception plan approval, approved premature close, or raised a new issue as a result of giving this direction. So if we look at authorizing project closure in the directing process, we would undertake this as the last activity in the project. So the plans for how we would go about project closure would be included in the last stages plan. So when I do the stage plan for the last stage, it includes the planning for the project closure process. It is not a separate stage on its own, usually. So when they authorize project closure, they may need to get approval from corporate or program. It depends on what tolerances were set for the board and what authority they were given. But steps are taken to review the original and current versions of the project to understand the initial baseline and the current strategies and controls. So what we're doing here is we're getting our lessons learned, things that might help future projects. They're going to look at the end project report, which summarizes the experience of the overall project. So if someone coming back and looking at this later wants to know how the project went and what lessons were learned, etc., they don't need to read each stage plan. They could read the end project report, which might refer back to them if there's a lot of documentation in the stage plan. But typically they could look here to get a good view of what lessons could be gleaned from that particular project. So it's prepared by the project manager and reviewed and approved by the board. The project board will confirm who receives any follow-on action or recommendations. So, for example, if the lessons learned report indicated that some of the templates used by the project management office could be improved, then the project board would make sure that someone has responsibility for implementing the action on that particular item. That's what we mean by follow-on actions. Also measuring any benefits, because a lot of the benefits may not occur until after the project. They'd be making sure it's clear who is responsible for doing that. The project board also reviews and gains approval for the updated benefits review plan, so if there are any changes to it. And this would be with the program level as well. Before the formal closure of the project manager will send the project closure notification to the concerned stakeholders. And the project closure notification is going to give people the heads up that the project is coming to an end, if there are outstanding costs, when those need to be submitted by in order to be paid, and that when the resources, etc., will be released. So we'll give that formal end date. Okay, so if we summarize, our inputs to those activities are going to be a closure recommendation that would be received at near the end of the last stage. It's going to include the project initiation documentation and updated business case, if there were updates. The end project report, which includes lessons and follow-on actions, if there are any, and the benefits review plan. They will then approve those inputs, so the end project report, the business case, and the benefits review plan, and issue the closure notification. Correct? Approving any off specifications is the project board. And that would fall under the giving advice or ad hoc direction task. Authorizing project initiation, correct. Ad hoc direction, yes, which also covers off the issues and off spec. Authorizing project closure, correct. So the project board is responsible for, well, the PM produces the final report, and the project board approves, you're correct, and authorizing individual stage plans, absolutely. Yeah. So basically, the project board is responsible for all of the tasks in directing a project process. And you're actually going to find that for the remainder of the processes. So good exam tip here. The only PRINCE2 process that has shared responsibilities is the startup, which is shared with the directing and the project manager. So the board and the project manager work together on that. All of the other processes are owned by, or the responsibility lies with one of the management levels. So it's either the delivering at the team lead, or it's manager, project manager, or it's the project board, or it's program level. So only startup process shares responsibility across two of the groups. How are the 7 themes applied? Absolutely. The board reviews. The project manager and the board reviews the business case, and it's updated if necessary. Actually, we're not verifying the outline business case here. We're actually, sorry, yes, we do. We do. If we're in the startup, they would verify and approve the outline business case under the directing process, making sure that there is a business justification. You're right. Yes. Approving the plans, the overall project plan when they're approving the initiation of a project and approving the delivery of a project, and the stage plans themselves. Yep, creating the project product description would be planning and business case. It would be both of those. Yep. Managing product delivery, directing doesn't get involved at the detail level of that. That's more the project manager, but they do, if you're looking at it from the perspective of they're overseeing the delivery of the project product, yes. Quality theme tolerances, yes. And also because the quality criteria will be defined in the product descriptions. Yes, benefits review plan would be the business case. It can also fall under tolerances, if and managing by exception, if the tolerances for the benefits are also identified, which they should be in the benefits review plan. We're still missing at least one. I'm thinking 2. Oh, no, I think it's just one missing. You did cover progress. The risk theme. The risks in the risk management strategy would be defined. Planning could also cover off the strategies, and organization as well, because my detailed roles and responsibilities will be part of the PID, which they are approving. Yep, ad hoc changes, they would be approving any changes required through the formal change review process. So we've covered the business case, the organization, plans, progress, quality, risks, and change. We didn't cover absolutely everything that's involved about them, but we did give examples of each. Which management products are produced? Right? The project product description? Others? Typically, they wouldn't be involved in the logs. However, from the perspective of them approving the strategies that will define how the logs are maintained, yes, they would approve that part of it. Good work, Christopher. Others. They're approving the project brief, the stage plans, the project plans, the exception plans. So all of those plans and documents are products. Issue reports, exception reports. Our PID is being reviewed by them. So if we're looking at the reviewed here. Okay, so basically they're approving and reviewing just about everything except the actual work packages. All right, let's start the initiating a project process. Again, same objectives as before, state the purpose and objective, look at the activities, and then identify the strategies for defined in the initiating a project process. So the objective, whoops, yeah, I thought I skipped one. The purpose is to establish a solid foundation for the project, enabling the organization to understand the work that needs to be done to deliver the project's products before committing to a significant spend. So it's just upping the game. Before we actually authorize all the work, we're making sure we've done as detailed a review as we need to be confident that our plan and our estimates are all accurate and that the benefits can be achieved. The objective is to make sure that we have a common understanding of the reasons that we're undertaking the project so that everybody is operating from the same context, ensuring that their scope of work is well defined and everyone understands it, that the costs and timescales are established and agreed to, that we have the expected benefits are understood by everyone, that the issues and risks and how we will manage them are agreed to and outlined. Quality expectations and management have been planned for, and everyone is in agreement that they're good, i.e. everyone agrees that the quality criteria and methods and resources and all of those things that are described in the product descriptions are accurate. It establishes the decision-making authority so everyone knows who they need to go to get something approved and what types of things need approval. That we've agreed on how we're going to handle communications or the distribution of information on the project, and that we know what the monitoring and controlling project progress is going to look like. So how often are highlight reports and checkpoint reports being produced? How many stages are there? So I know how I'm going to involve my project board and how often and at what points. So those are all the objectives. So if I take a look at it from an overview, as soon as we have the authority to initiate, once the authority to initiate a project has been received, the project manager can start to prepare the risk management strategy, the quality management strategy, and the configuration management strategy. Because our project brief has given us enough information to do this. We're going to make sure that those strategies address any corporate requirements. So if my project management office has a guideline on how I'm supposed to manage risk and the processes that I'm to use, those will be either referenced or incorporated into my risk management strategy. And the same with quality and configuration management. The configuration management strategy can include more than one configuration management tool. So for example, many organizations have good configuration management around their software items and perhaps their hardware, but not so good on the documents side, like the project plans and like feasibility studies or process maps or things like that that might be produced throughout the project. So you would have to identify all the methods you're using to manage all of the product deliverable or project deliverables. Once we know what the risk management strategy, the quality management strategy, and configuration management strategy are, we can then work on the communication strategy, because there's going to be communications related to each of these, so I need to know those strategies to properly prepare the communication strategy. Having all my strategies set up, I can now set up the project controls. So my risk logs, my issue logs, my quality registers, my configuration items, my product status account reports can all be established. And I can create the detailed project plan. Now, the detailed project plan is describing the stages, not how the work gets assigned to the individual teams, right? That's done in the stage plan. I refine the business case. So if doing all of this work, especially creating the plan, has an impact on the business case, or if there were assumptions or blank spots that we had intended to look into during initiation, those would get filled in so that we have a complete business case when we're finished project initiation. And then we pull all that documentation together into the project initiation documentation and prepare the request to deliver the project. Okay, so that's the initiating a project. And we just went through all the many components of the project initiation documentation. So when the stage boundary is approaching, i.e. I'm getting close to the end of the initiating a project, I'm going to start my managing a stage boundary process, which means I'm looking back at lessons learned and how this went, and I'm preparing the detailed stage plan for the next stage. So that's initiating a project. The activities are, as we saw on the diagram, preparing all of the strategies, setting up the controls, creating the project plan, refining the business case, and assembling the project initiation documentation. So let's take a look at each of these. In the risk management strategy, we're going to define the goals of the risk management plan, including the risk management procedure. So if there's a specific form someone needs to fill out when they identify a risk, that would be identified. Who's going to enter it into the risk register? Who's going to manage and control that risk as it goes through its life cycle? Roles and responsibilities related to risk management, as I was just outlining. So who's the owner of the risk? Who's the actionee if the risk is realized? What are our risk tolerances? The timing of any risk activities. So how often am I going to review my risk register? Am I going to review my risk register on a monthly basis, a weekly basis? Am I reviewing all my risks, or am I just reviewing the high impact, high probability risks? So that would all get defined in the strategy. Any tools or techniques. So if I'm using certain tools to track risk, maybe it's an Excel spreadsheet or a Word document, or maybe I have a risk management software package that I'm going to use. Those would all be specified as well. So, and under here as well, we could be putting forms. We would define what the specific risk register would look like and what the key components are that I would be tracking there. All my reporting requirements related to the risks would be identified. So if I have to report weekly on a risk to my project manager, if I'm the risk owner, then that would be specified and how I would do that. Any questions? Okay. In developing the configuration management strategy, we're going to define the configuration management procedure. So basically, it's the same types of things we did in risk, only we're applying it to configuration management. So we're looking at all of the procedures, how we're going to identify the items, how we're going to control them, what processes go through when there's an update to them, and we may have different types of control for different types of products. So software might have one way of being managed, a document or a feasibility study or a process map might have a different one. So we have to make sure that we cover off all the items that we need to manage and have an appropriate control for each one. How we're going to do status accounting. And status accounting is just letting us track and take a snapshot of where are things at this particular point in time. What is the status of each of the deliverables? Is it started? Has it been verified? Has it been approved and signed off? Are there outstanding change requests related to it? So it may be signed off, but there's a change request, so there's still work to be done on it. Our issue and change control procedure falls under the configuration management strategy. Now, if you want to produce it as a separate document, that's fine. You've addressed it. It's been looked after. But it is grouped for the sake of explaining the PRINCE2. It's grouped under configuration management strategy. The timing of the configuration management activities and the issue and change control activities. So, for example, if there's a change advisory board that's going to have to review all of the changes that are submitted, how often does that board meet? How quickly after receiving a change request do I have to respond to the person who initiated it or make a decision on it? Any of those time frames would be documented. And then, of course, any roles or responsibilities. So if I have a change authority, what's their role? What's the board's role? By default, the board has to approve all changes, but if they're delegating some of that down to a change authority or to the project manager, that would get specified. And that maybe a different change authority is required depending on the impact or severity of the change. So that gets identified there as well. So the configuration management strategy, just let me quickly flip to that for you. So to summarize the configuration management strategy just a little bit more than we have here, it's going to answer questions like, how and where are the project's products being stored? How are we going to look after the security of those products? How are the versions going to be tracked? How are the changes going to be controlled to each of those products? And again, that could differ depending on the type of product. And where's the responsibility? And yes, we've covered it. Oh, the only thing we haven't covered is the scales for priority and severity. So if a change request or an issue has a high impact, what does that mean? So we would define how we're categorizing them, and we're going to see a couple of those in some of the other steps. The quality management strategy describes the expectations and standards to be followed and how we're going to assess whether our products have met the quality management strategy and the quality criteria or not. So as we're evaluating whether the quality criteria have been met for each product, we're making sure that the quality management strategy has been implemented properly. So that would be a project assurance type role to check and make sure that that's happening. So the strategy will outline the procedure, including any quality planning, control, or assurance activities that have to occur. And I'm assuming you guys understand the difference between the planning, control, and assurance. This being more about the actual setting up of processes, this being the how and when and scheduling, and this being the actual inspection type, how do I verify it, and making sure it's done. Roles and responsibilities are identified for quality management and the timing of the activities. So am I doing the quality management and verification and quality control of a product when it's completed, or am I waiting and doing them all at the end of the stage? Typically, you would do them as they're completed, but you'd make sure that that's specified. Any tools or techniques that you're using. So if there's a quality review checklist, for example, you would specify that. And it would be developed, and you might even have a sample of it in the quality management strategy. If you're using an automated test tool, you would be defining that as well and where it fits into the procedures. Communication strategy, which is prepared after those three strategies we just reviewed, covers off the communication management procedure. So, for example, I used to work for a big steel company on one of their projects. I was a change manager there. And any communications that went out, whether they were internal or external, if they were meant for a group of people as opposed to an individual email, had to be approved by the corporate communications department. So that had to be worked into our communication procedure for the project. No other project I worked on did that. I just had to get the project managers or the project sponsors authority in that case, which would be equate to the executive under PRINCE2. So whatever the management procedure is, who drafts it, where does it get stored once it's been created, is it going to be electronic, is it going to be a presentation face-to-face, are communications going to use a website where people can blog or ask questions or access all the project documentation, the timing of the activities. So am I going to send out an update at the end of each stage to stakeholders? What are the requirements for communication? What are they interested in? Would also get covered off. Roles and responsibilities for the communications. So who's producing them, who's planning, who's approving, and the stakeholder analysis. Because without stakeholder analysis, I don't know what they need to hear. I don't know whether I can send the same message to everyone or whether I need to customize different messages for different stakeholder groups. I'm going to open up your mic, Taryn. You can state your question because I'm not clear. I'm not sure I quite understand. Okay. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Actually, my question is like we are following for certain documents and we are following some certain procedures. And is there any from quality point of view, is there any check which makes sure that okay those processes are followed or not, or
yes.
It's not there in the process? Yeah.
Yes, they are, and they're part of the project assurance and the quality assurance. So the quality assurance, and they would get addressed in the quality management strategy as well. So good point. So the project assurance, which is the board making sure that you're following the processes and strategies that they laid out and following the plan that was approved. So they might be checking it themselves, or they might have somebody external to the project perform that quality assurance or project assurance for them. So that could be someone from a project management office, for example. Does that fully answer your question?
Yeah, because I was not able to understand that it will come in quality management strategy or not, or how it will be.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks for asking. You're welcome. Okay, so if we look at these strategies, we're making sure that everything is developed and aligned to the corporate and program management strategies. So we're making sure that the results or the products of the product are going to enable the organization to achieve its objectives. And we're going to make sure that any requirements related to quality or related to risk management or related to how we can manage configuration items would all be addressed. So the strategies are derived from the corporate and program management strategy standards and practices, if they're applicable. And we'd have to have a pretty good reason for not including them. So if we're not going to follow them, we'd have to provide the justification for why we weren't and get approval, of course. The strategies are defined by the project manager, reviewed by project assurance, and then the project board can approve the strategy. They may also be reviewed by quality assurance, which is external to the project. The project board and project assurance are considered to be internal to the project because the project board is part of the project team. The project board approves the strategies, and then project support, once the strategy is approved, can create the quality register, the configuration item register records, and the project manager would then approve that they've been properly set up. So here's an example of the PID, giving you a better idea of what's included in it. So in initiating the project, one of the activities is to assemble, the last one is to assemble the project initiation documentation. So I'm taking my project brief and building on it, which has my project definition and approach. I'm preparing the detailed business case, the team structure, the role descriptions, if they hadn't already been done. If these had been done in project startup, then obviously I wouldn't need to do it, but they would still be included in the documentation. The quality management, configuration management, and risk management strategies, and then the communication strategy, the project plan, project controls, and any tailoring that we did would be identified. And again, if this had been already set up or described in startup, then we would just simply include the relevant documents. Let's start controlling a stage. So we're going to state the purpose and objective and look at the different activities related to it. The purpose of controlling a stage is to assign the work to be done, to monitor the work, deal with any issues, and report progress to the board. If we find there are problems, controlling a stage also is the mechanism we use to take corrective action to ensure that the stage remains within tolerance. So if I, as a project manager, can take corrective action to bring the stage back into tolerance, I don't necessarily need to report it up. I escalate it up if I can't get it into tolerance so that I can get advice and assistance. So if I find out that one of my project teams is running late, but I have a resource that can help them out, and if I loan them to that team for a week, that will get things back on track, then I don't have to worry about it. Yes, addressing changes because they're incorporated in issues, in the issues log for PRINCE2, that they are also addressed here. That's correct. Good point. Yes, because if I make any changes, I re-baseline. So the objective is to ensure that the team, including the managers, members, and suppliers, all know what they're supposed to be doing, to make sure that their work is authorized, to ensure that the project manager is getting accurate progress information on a regular basis, and that's done through our checkpoint reports. And of course, anytime it's necessary, I could be providing advice to my project team, my team leads or their team members. I'm making sure that the work allocated to the team is formally agreed upon and authorized. And I do this through my work packages. So the lowest level of my product breakdown structure has my work packages. And I'm going to use my controlling a stage to interface with the team manager to assign the work package. If they need any clarification or they have any concerns, we discuss them before they start working on it. And I can provide advice as a project manager to them at that time. We're making sure by doing this, by making sure we walk through and get an agreement with the team lead that they can produce the deliverable or the product according to the plan, or we make the appropriate adjustments so that they can. We're making sure that the team is clearly aware of what the product is, because I have my product description, the cost and timeline efforts and estimates, and the tolerances related to that particular work package and product. So we're making sure all the communications are clear, understood, and everybody's on the same page before we start the work. This, of course, requires a signed-off product description, which is sometimes a challenge in our project environments. They want us to start working before we have those. Under PRINCE2, you should have a signed-off, i.e., the user has signed off on the product description before you start working on it. Does everybody have that happen in their work environment? I'm saying that somewhat tongue-in-cheek because it's always a battle. Yeah, most of the participants in the classes I teach tell me the same thing, and it's political. It's not that you don't want them. It's not that you don't press for them as a project manager. It's that our executive or sponsor or whoever we report to tells us to just go ahead and not worry about it. PRINCE2 gives you some backing as to why you need to have these things. BJ, I want to open the mic up and have you explain how Agile helps us with this, because I know the principles, but I'm not really as familiar with Agile as some of the others. Go ahead.
So, and what I meant was, so we don't have the product description really signed off, and for various reasons. It could be either they are pretty much not clear of what exactly they want. There might be changes that will come their way in terms of the functionality. There could be priority changes that happens and they want C to be completed much before A is completed in a sequence of A, B, C kind of. So that is where Agile is helping us in terms of quickly adjusting to the schedule and going back to the MVP, what we call in the Agile, which is the most viable product that they would want, and keep on adding the additional features as and when they keep asking us. And what happens is the sprints or the delivery schedules that we generally keep are as small as 2 weeks typically, and helps us to go back and re-baseline our plans. keep adding those features to the backlog in first place, and then change the priorities and priority of the backlogs in such a way that focus moves on to item number 3 first rather than item number 1, because we don't have the complete details on item number 1, which needs to be signed off by the client or by the issuing authority. So I think that's where Agile is helping us when compared to the waterfall methodology, because the product that we are working on was developed in the waterfall methodology quite a long time back, and in the current scheme of things we are getting enhancements to it in the Agile way, or rewriting the product into a new technology and new way. In that we are following the Agile, and it's really helping us to do things.
That's somewhat in. I'm just going to Pranav has a good point here as well. It does help you from that perspective, but PRINCE2 still applies. And as Pranav is saying, we usually want to get the sign off on what we're doing in that sprint or in that 2 or 3 week period. So you're still, it's almost like you're getting that work package approved as you go along. You would still have overall objectives and overall plans for a specific window of what you're trying to accomplish, if I understand correctly. Pranav, I'm going to open your mic. Is there anything you wanted to add to that?
Actually, I did not introduce myself in the first place. I'm Pranav. I'm having nearly 4 years of experience as a business analyst. As a business analyst, the process in my company goes in such a way that we initially get the requirements. If we don't freeze the requirements in the initial stage, and it keeps on going, it crosses the project budget. So that is the reason we usually get the sign off in the initial stage and then get the other requirements as future enhancement. So that's how it goes on, basically. So we want the customer to feel the product first and then give their outputs, inputs, so that we can go further and do their enhancements.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why under PRINCE2, regardless of your methodology, whether you're using waterfall or agile, you still need a product description. So it may be a general description, and then you're tweaking the features that you're including in it according to your sprint. So in other words, you could be treating it like a work package as to specifically what you're going to include in the next version of it, but you still should have that approved, what your user is expecting, before you start the work for that sprint. So Vijay, is that what you're doing? Are you getting their approval before the individual sprints that you're doing?
That's correct.
So you're still applying PRINCE2. It's just you're overlaying
exactly.
it. Yeah.
Exactly. So I think I agree to Pranav's point in terms of the future enhancement. But what we generally follow is not the feature enhancement, but it basically gets added to my backlog, and we keep working on it as we proceed to my subsequent sprints.
Yeah, so it gets prioritized, and when it gets to the top of the list, it gets dealt with. Yeah. Okay.
Absolutely.
And that all falls in a general project product description, and it might still be broken down, but the details at that very detailed requirement level are what's going to be changing within those different sprints.
Correct.
Okay, perfect.
It moves to the subsequent sprints because the sign-off we don't have in first place. The reason is the client is also pretty not clear about what they would want or how should it function.
Yeah, sometimes you need to work with it to really understand what they need. And as business analysts, there's only so much you can ask to clarify with them. Excellent conversation, and very helpful, I think, in terms of helping identify how we could apply PRINCE2 under both. Did you discuss how technical stages overlap the management stages in your previous sessions? Because that discussion was a perfect example of how that works. So you're in Agile, your technical stages are quite short, so you might have several of them being addressed in a management stage, whereas in Waterfall, you may have something like the design technical stage being stretched across multiple management stages, but you would at least define how much of the design you expect to have finished at the end of the stage. Yes, exactly. Sometimes they do evolve day to day. Okay, excellent. So summarizing, we've got our controlling a stage, where we are looking at escalating issues, reporting, doing our highlight reports, taking any corrective actions, authorizing work packages, reviewing the stage status, reviewing work packages on a regular basis, and primarily through our checkpoint reports that we would be receiving the completed work packages, and capturing and examining issues and risks so that we can report on those. And of course, central to all this is reviewing the stage status to make sure things are moving along and identify if we have any exceptions that need to be escalated up, etc. So in the stage boundary approaches, we're going to do the managing a stage boundary process where we do the review of the past stage and the progress on it and any lessons learned and incorporate them into the next stage plan. And if we're in the final stage and the project end is approaching, instead of the stage boundary, we would do the closing project. So controlling a stage interfaces in that way. Okay. And the authority to do a work package would be provided, so we would authorize it in controlling a stage, but the actual work is part of the managing product delivery. And once it's completed, we receive it. Okay? Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great week.